It is truly undeniable. There is something about the music of the great film scoring maestro Jerry Goldsmith that once you catch the Goldsmith bug, it never lets go, and it compels you to hunt down and collect and listen to every single note that he ever wrote. Whether it's commercially available at the time or not, these Jerry Goldsmith fans will find a way to discover all of the fantastic gems that he ever came up with as a film composer, and I am certainly one who has been long infected with the Goldsmith bug. I am not looking for a cure, I am looking to hear every single note that he ever composed. And certainly I'm in the best of company because there are plenty of folks out there who feel the same way, and it is evidenced by their diligence to do just that. Today we are going to be discussing a historic piece of film music preservation in Intrada's Excalibur collection for the album Jerry Goldsmith at the General Electric Theater. This is truly an achievement and a cause for celebration, not only among the hardest of hardcore Jerry Goldsmith fans, but for any fan of wonderful film music. In this collection from the General Electric Theater, we have music from the episodes Hitler's Secret, The Last Dance, Sarah's Laughter, The Committeeman, The Legend That Walks Like a Man, My Dark Days, the Bar Mitzvah of Major Orlovski, as well as a suite composed for the CBS Music Library titled Autumn Love. As evidenced by this generous and most rare collection of Jerry Goldsmith film music, there's a lot to discover here, there's a lot to talk about, and it is an honor today to be sitting here and able to talk about this music that could very well have been forgotten and covered by the sands of time were it not for the lovely people who worked so diligently to bring this project together for all of us to enjoy. I'm Ted, the soundtrack guy. For those of you who are not familiar, stick with me until the end of this video. I'll be discussing another Jerry Goldsmith masterpiece, which I believe should have won an Academy Award. Now, I could be talking about pretty much anything he ever wrote, right? But what is it? We'll see at the end of this video. Stay tuned. Now, each of the soundtracks to the episodes included on this CD were previously recorded with the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, and every one of them was reconstructed and conducted by the great Lee Phillips. Interestingly, some of the scores here presented survived in written form, and others Lee Phillips actually had to reconstruct by ear using episode audio. Now, as old as these episodes are, the earliest in this collection being 1959's Hitler's Secret, that task could not have been easy, and it was very obviously a labor of love, and that labor of love definitely birthed a most wonderful soundtrack album. Now, I remember seeing this project taking shape. Lee Phillips ran several Kickstarters in order to fund the recordings of every one of these episodes, and they were originally only available in digital download format off of his website. And I thought to myself, boy, as exciting as this is, wouldn't it be great if we got this entire collection on a physical CD someday? Well, thanks to the wonderful Intrada soundtrack label, that wish has become a fully realized reality. And speaking of Intrada Records, let's talk about this album for a second, shall we? The packaging is absolutely beautiful. We've got this retro-styled photograph with a striking cover of Jerry Goldsmith conducting there, and inside, now we're going to talk about liner notes today. Inside, we have got extensive, detailed liner notes by Goldsmith authority Yavar Maradi, and this is a substantial booklet. This is probably some 7,000 words of the most lovingly detailed and informative liner notes that I've ever read, and I've read quite a few liner notes in my day. Now, these episodes are very rare, but let me tell you, the notes are so good and so clear and precise that you can easily place the music within the drama of each story just by reading Yavar's masterful essay. I very much would like to see more liner notes from Yavar Maradi. And thankfully, another Kickstarter-backed soundtrack album produced by the great Lee Phillips is coming out very soon, and this album covers 3 made-for-television scores by Jerry Goldsmith, Pursuit, Crawlspace, and The People Next Door, and Yavar will be providing the track-by-track analysis notes, and John Burlingame will provide the notes on the project itself and all the background detail therein. And let me not forget to mention that Yavar is also the film music historian and producer, co-host of the Goldsmith Odyssey podcast, which is a podcast chronicling Goldsmith's entire musical output and career. Now, in terms of the GE Theater album we're discussing today, this podcast has episodes dedicated to these GE recordings. And of course, I've heard every single one of them, and I can attest to you that they are well worth your time. The booklet in the GE Theater album also treats us to a number of rare photos, as well as a few pictures of Lee Phillips conducting the orchestra during the recordings. Now, I got a link to watch the scoring session of The Last Dance, and that went on for maybe 2-3 hours on this live link. One of the most fascinating and enjoyable experiences I've had in relatively recent memory in terms of soundtracks. Many are no longer aware what the General Electric Theater even was these days. It was an anthology TV series that aired on CBS from 1953 to 1962, hosted by Ronald Reagan. And while it's uncertain just how many scores Jerry Goldsmith provided for this series, I am definitely grateful that we have at least preserved these 7 scores as seen on this Entrada album, and I very much hope that we will be discovering more scores in the future. So let's dive into the music, shall we? Starting with the very first episode featured on this album, which of course is Hitler's Secret. This is probably the first time that Jerry Goldsmith worked with director Boris Sagal, for whom he would later score the 1981 miniseries Masada, for which he won a well-deserved Emmy. Now, while I was not able to watch this episode, the plot centers around Adolf Hitler's rise to power in his attempt to get the son of former German President Paul von Hindenburg to lie and tell the German people that his father issued a deathbed endorsement. As is true of every single one of these episodes, Yavar's impeccable notes greatly aid the imagination to be able to understand what it was that Jerry Goldsmith was writing music for visually, even though we can't see many of these episodes any longer. In addition to that help, there were cue titles and timing notes in Jerry's score, which gave Yavar the ability to communicate what it was that Jerry Goldsmith was writing for. Now, this score is very brass and percussion heavy, and it reminds me a lot of what Jerry Goldsmith would later do for the segment Time Out in the Twilight Zone, the movie soundtrack, as well as work that he did for the movie Boys from Brazil, and even segments of the Rambo series. Track 1 on the album, titled The Beginning/The Plan/The Visit, communicates this score fairly comprehensively with snare drum waves and a strident, threatening brass motif which represents Hitler. The use of the marimba reminds me actually of Jerry Goldsmith's score for High Velocity, which is used in this track and also in track 2, Sick Man/Papa's Orders/The Truth, as well as the chimes. There's chimes in this score that remind me very subtly of the foreboding segments of the soundtrack for The Final Conflict, which in my estimation is one of Jerry Goldsmith's supreme masterpieces. It's just very gratifying to recognize fingerprints of Jerry Goldsmith on work this early on in his career as a film composer, when you originally might have thought to yourself, oh, well, that must have been a unique idea that he just came up with, say in this case, for the final conflict. But in fact, he was such a genius that he seems to have already had his musical language, the totality of his musical language, already stored up and ready to go within himself from the word go. It's really a fascinating thing to dive deep into Jerry Goldsmith's catalog and get a broad overview picture of all that he wrote over the course of his incredible career. Overall, Hitler's Secret is ominous and tense and threatening and very militant. And it's kind of like a tank. The score is like a tank, and it's going to run you over. Now, the second episode of this album is titled The Last Dance. Now, this episode was also a missing episode. We're unable to see exactly what was going on here, but it's a story about a young newlywed couple starting out in their lives together. Now, the score is so lovely and delicate. This is one of my absolute favorite Goldsmith modes from his early days. It's a very sensitive score for strings, harp, and oboe, and this just happens to be the score that was being recorded during the sessions that I was able to view through the live link across the internet. This score is both somber and reflective as well as hopeful, but it's only hopeful in very brief flashes. In track 7 on this GE album, titled Problems/Burnt Shirt, Jerry Goldsmith offers this carefree, hopeful pizzicato string work, and it's featured in an otherwise pained cue for oboe, string, and harp. And this kind of approach to film scoring reminds me a lot of the work that he did in A Patch of Blue, especially when it comes to the string plucks that I'm talking about. While the soundtrack to every episode offered on this album shines, this is a notable performance in my estimation. Easily one of my favorites on the entire album. It's the sensitivity that's offered here. It's just the crystal clarity and the beauty. It's like holding a diamond up to the light and just looking at every shining detail. Now, the next episode offered on this album is called Sarah's Laughter, and this also is another missing episode that can't be viewed, but it is the second outing that Jerry Goldsmith had with director David Green from the previous score that we just discussed, The Last Dance. And this story is about an older, childless couple who've grown apart over the years. We have in this score more Patch of Blue style music, but in this case, we have the added harmonica, which wasn't present in the previous soundtrack for The Last Dance, which definitely gives it this Americana flavor, which was also present in, as I already said, A Patch of Blue. In the main theme, which is mostly harmonica, it's this very lonely sounding music, and some of it is dark and frightful and almost dissonant sounding in certain sections to this score. There's also a kind of walking pace pizzicato string offering with lighter melodies on the strings, and that helps to keep the heaviness at bay to some degree. And there's also warm and cheerful material prominent in track 11, which is titled Baby Book. One of the great highlights to this particular score is how Jerry Goldsmith develops the main theme in such a short amount of time. Keep in mind, each one of these episode soundtracks are, I don't know, on average, maybe about 7-8 minutes or so. And so there's not a whole lot of room for, let's say, an arc to be developed, but Jerry Goldsmith, being the master that he is, somehow manages it each and every time, and it's very evident in this particular episode. The next score is for an episode titled The Committeeman, and wonder of wonders, this episode is actually available for viewing on YouTube. This is a story about a Depression-era Italian father wanting to make a difference by entering local politics at the embarrassment of his son and his brother-in-law, but mostly it's between him and his son. This is a good episode. Honestly, I wasn't expecting it, but at the end of the episode, when Dominic and his son kind of have their heart-to-heart, and they embrace, I actually teared up a little bit. I thought to myself, boy, I wasn't really expecting that kind of an emotional response to any of this material, but I'm sure Jerry Goldsmith, of course, had something to do with bringing those tears to my eyes. In this score, Jerry Goldsmith gives us the expected Italian colors given the subject matter of the episode on mandolin and the accordion. It makes me think of Angie. These are very different scores, but again, there was just that Italian coloring going on there that prompted my memory in terms of the Angie soundtrack. Track 14 on the album, main title. This is Dominic's theme, and it weighs in heavily throughout the entire score. It turns from sounding deflated to being buoyant, back and forth, and it's such a great theme, but this was one score that was definitely helped by Yavar's notes and also by seeing the actual episode, because on my first listen, divorced of the episode viewing and also not having read the liner notes, I was a little bit 50-50 on this one. I probably because of the mandolin and just kind of that very obvious Italian flavor. Not that that's a bad thing necessarily, but it just kind of was harder for me to catch the drift of the emotional weight and intent of what was written. But once I had that context, it actually elevated itself and became one of my more preferred offerings on this entire album. Easily my favorite tracks on the Committeeman soundtrack are track 16, which is The Ring, and track 18, which is titled The Boy. Now here Goldsmith emphasizes Dominic's theme with deep sensitivity that is weighted in love, but tinged also with real sadness. Now in the track The Ring, this is such a touching scene in this episode, and it develops the main theme into a kind of family theme. And then in The Boy, we return in the same spirit, only this time it's warm and sentimental and no longer searching in the thematic material. It's no longer this searching feeling, but it's rooted and grounded. And this is that scene that I was referring to that caused me to tear up. It's just a wonderful little episode, wonderful piece of music. Moving right along to the next episode, it is The Legend That Walks Like a Man. This is a story about the legend, who is a down-on-his-luck fictional Hollywood director, Matty Moran, played by Ernest Borgnine. Now, the notes indicate that the episode has a sort of light-hearted, semi-comedic tone to it, despite the director's downfall and second chance shot at re-entering Hollywood, but which ultimately falls through. Yet, it is, I guess, about the legend that matters the most here, the legend of Matty Moran, the director. And Goldsmith is as boisterous and energetic and cheerful in his music as the episode's tone might suggest. This reminds me very much of the fabulous score for Studs Lonigan, also, of course, a Jerry Goldsmith soundtrack. And by the way, a young John Williams, often referred in those days as Johnny Williams, performed some of the very complex piano music in the Studs Lonigan soundtrack. That was originally released on the Verez Saraband label and was re-released on Quartet Records. Another aside, yes, but highly recommended soundtrack in the Jerry Goldsmith canon. Overall, this score is very lighthearted. It's clipping along on lively piano and soft snare drums, and it's got this ticky-tack kind of percussion going on the whole time. It makes you move. You've got to move when you're hearing this music. It communicates slight buffoonery in the musical tonality and only occasionally hints again at the heavier implications of the narrative, but it is a very fun listen and certainly very appropriately scored to the material and to the performances that were present in this episode. Now, in terms of the episodes themselves, the next episode, titled My Dark Days, is a marked low point. Now, This was very painful to watch, and yes, unfortunately, of all of these episodes, this is one that is also available for viewing on YouTube. Personally, I don't recommend watching this. This is, in my estimation, a flagrant HUAC propaganda piece championed by Ronald Reagan, but at least we have Jerry Goldsmith's fabulous music to appreciate within this painful episode. It's also, by the way, a two-part episode, as if it wouldn't have been bad enough just around 20 to 25 minutes. We actually get double that on screen time, but once again, we also get double that, more or less, on the album time for this particular soundtrack. Most of this score is very subdued, actually, I would say, almost dirge-like and vaguely sinister. We've got low strings, gentle timpani, and muted French horns throughout. Might be just me, but the tone or vibration of these subtle passages reminds me of the uneasiness that permeates the track Temptation in the great Bernard Herrmann's soundtrack to Psycho. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm kind of going out there with some of these comparisons that I'm talking about, like maybe with The Final Conflict and Angie and now Temptations from Psycho, but I don't mean necessarily that these scores are the same so much that there is, again, a vibration or just this temperature in the air when you're hearing this kind of music. And Jerry Goldsmith is, in my estimation here, giving us this particular tense, almost fever dream kind of feel to everything in both parts of this episode. The next and final episode represented on this album is the soundtrack to the Bar Mitzvah of Major Orlovski. Now, this, I thought, was a very special little score. This is definitely another one of my personal favorite scores on this album, and Jerry Goldsmith here is writing in a Jewish mode of musical expression, and it very much is foreshadowing the triumphs that he would write for the miniseries Masada as well as QB7. This is a story about a former Russian fighter pilot's journey to accept the Jewish faith that he rejected as a teenager. This is a very sensitive journey in miniature, very intimate and expressive. This is another character portrait, and I feel that Jerry Goldsmith does character portraits in his film music like no other. This is no exception. Brief though it is, it definitely gives you a very keen and insightful look, a very poignant look into this character's inner world and landscape and journey. Orlovsky's Jewish heritage is very tastefully flavored throughout, and by the score's end, you've gotten a full circle, musical conclusion, and complete arc to the dramatic elements featured in this episode. As if all the amazing music just discussed wasn't enough to complete this magnificent album, we're given a bonus of sorts in music that was written probably in the late 1950s that Jerry Goldsmith offered for the CBS Music Library, and that is a little suite, a little 9-minute suite titled Autumn Love. This is a gorgeous, graceful, string-heavy piece that's glittering with subtle harp, and as far as I'm concerned, this is going to be somewhat of a bold statement, but as far as I'm concerned, Autumn Love is every bit the masterwork that Jerry Goldsmith's prologue to the agony and the ecstasy is, perhaps just on a less majestic and grand scale, but this is a notable piece of music. Now, together with The Last Dance and the Bar Mitzvah of Major Orlovski, Autumn Love is definitely one of my top 3 favorite soundtracks on this lovely album. You've got to hear it, most especially if you're a die-hard Jerry Goldsmith fan, but any lover of great film music and music in general, this music is going to pierce your heart and perhaps change you forever. It honestly is that good. As promised at the outset of this video, I am going to turn you on to a Jerry Goldsmith soundtrack that absolutely deserved to have won the Academy Award. Click right here to watch that video. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of My Favorite Soundtrack with Ted the Soundtrack Guy. We'll see you next time, and in the meantime, happy listening.